Texas, May 1945. The war in Europe had been over for barely 2 weeks, and Major Jim Harrison stood inside a classified hangar at RAF Boscombe Down, England, staring at a number that would shatter everything he believed about American air superiority: 483 miles per hour. The clipboard trembled in his hand, not from fear, from the kind of shock that rewrites a man's understanding of the world. He had flown the best fighters America could build: the P-51 Mustang, the P-47 Thunderbolt, aircraft that had swept the Luftwaffe from the skies and escorted thousands of bombers home. He had believed with the certainty of a man who had staked his life on it that American engineering stood alone at the peak of aviation achievement. The number on the clipboard said otherwise: 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet, faster than any American fighter he had ever touched. Faster than the Mustang that had carried him through 32 combat missions. Faster than anything rolling off the production lines in Detroit or Long Beach or Wichita. And it wasn't ours. Harrison looked up at the aircraft before him. Supermarine Spitfire F Mark 14. The name meant nothing to him 6 months ago. British designation, British design, British engineering. The kind of aircraft American intelligence reports had dismissed as evolutionary dead ends, incremental improvements on obsolete airframes. Those reports had been wrong. The fuselage gleamed under the hangar lights, its lines cleaner than any Spitfire he had seen. The wings looked wrong at first glance, too thin, too sharp, like someone had taken a conventional fighter and filed away everything unnecessary. Laminar flow, the British engineers called it, a design philosophy that treated air like water and shaped metal to slip through it with minimal resistance. It worked. The numbers proved it worked. Harrison had spent 3 years telling himself a comfortable story: that American ingenuity, American manufacturing power, American can-do spirit had produced the finest military aircraft in human history. That our allies in Britain, brave as they were, flew second-tier equipment and made up the difference with courage and desperation. Standing in that hangar with the weight of honest data in his hands, that story collapsed. The British had built something faster, and they had kept it quiet. 6 months earlier, November 1944, London. The city still bore the scars of the Blitz, though the V-2 rockets had replaced the nightly bombing runs. Harrison sat across a scarred oak desk from Colonel Frank Morrison, his commanding officer at USS AAF headquarters. Morrison was a big man built like the B-17 CS he had once piloted, with a face that looked like it had been carved from Oklahoma granite. Morrison slid a folder across the desk. "Jim, I need you to go to England, RAF Boscombe Down, their test facility." Harrison opened the folder: list of aircraft designations, classified stamps, Royal Air Force letterhead. "They claim," Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of skepticism, "they have the fastest fighters in the world. Not just the fastest British fighters, the fastest, period." Harrison felt something tighten in his chest, pride maybe, or territorial instinct. "With all due respect, sir, that's impossible." Morrison leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "I agree, which is why I'm sending you. I want you to fly their aircraft. Get me the real numbers. Scientific testing. None of this RAF propaganda nonsense." He paused, fixing Harrison with a look that could strip paint. "Show them why American engineering is superior. Prove they're wrong. Can you do that?" Harrison thought about the P-51 sitting on the tarmac outside. The Mustang he had named Eleanor after his wife back in Amarillo. The aircraft that had carried him through the skies over France and Germany, that had responded to his touch like a living thing that had never let him down when German fighters came screaming out of the sun. "Yes, sir, I can do that." Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good, because the Pentagon is watching this. We're heading into a new world, Jim. After the war ends, Congress is going to ask hard questions about defense spending. Which aircraft to keep building? Which programs to fund? If the British can prove their planes are faster, better, more advanced than ours, that affects everything. Budgets, procurement, national pride." He leaned forward. "I don't need you to lie. I need you to find the truth. And the truth, I'm confident, will show that American aircraft are the best in the world." Harrison stood, the folder tucked under his arm. "I'll get you the facts, sir." And what he didn't know, couldn't know, was that the facts would not cooperate with his confidence. December 1944. Harrison arrived at RAF Boscombe down on a morning when England looked exactly like every American soldier's complaint about England. Gray sky, cold rain, mud that seemed to have a personal vendetta against clean boots. The aeroplane and armament experimental establishment sprawled across Wiltshire countryside like a small city dedicated to the science of flight. Hangars, test facilities, machine shops, wind tunnels, runways that stretched toward horizons lost in December mist. Wing Commander Arthur Pemberton met him at the operations building. British, late 40s, ramrod posture that spoke of a lifetime in service, eyes that had seen too many young men fail to return from missions. Major Harrison, welcome to Boscombe Down. The accent was clipped precise, the kind of English that Americans associated with Oxford and BBC broadcasts. I understand you're here to evaluate our aircraft. Harrison shook his hand, firm grip, calluses that came from years handling control sticks. That's right, Commander. My government wants to know what you've got. Pemberton smiled. It was not quite friendly, but not hostile either. The smile of a man who knows something you don't and is curious to see how long it takes you to figure it out. I suspect you'll be surprised, Major. Perhaps we should begin with a tour. They walked through the facility. Harrison saw Spitfires in various configurations, Hurricanes being retrofitted, Mosquitoes with their distinctive twin tail booms, Tempests, Typhoons, aircraft he recognized from intelligence briefings and combat reports. Then Pemberton led him to a hangar at the far end of the complex. Restricted access, guards at the door who checked credentials twice. Inside, Harrison saw something he didn't recognize. The aircraft looked like a Spitfire that had been put through a filter of pure efficiency. Elliptical wings, yes, but refined. The fuselage longer, cleaner. The canopy streamlined. Every line suggested speed in a way that went beyond aesthetics into the realm of physics. Supermarine spiteful, Pemberton said quietly. F Mark 14. Never heard of it. No, you wouldn't have. Highly classified. Only a handful exist. Harrison walked around it slowly, the way a man circles something he doesn't quite trust. What's it do? Pemberton handed him a clipboard. Test data, performance specifications. Numbers that made Harrison's pulse quicken despite himself. Maximum level flight speed 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. Documented, verified, repeatable. Harrison looked at the numbers, looked at the aircraft, looked back at Pemberton. That's faster than a P-51. Yes, that's faster than anything we have. Yes. The hangar felt very quiet. Outside rain drummed against the metal roof. Harrison's mind raced through implications. If this was true, if the data was accurate, if the British had actually built a fighter that exceeded American capabilities in pure speed, I'll need to verify this myself. Of course, that's why you're here. Pemberton gestured toward a door at the back of the hangar. But the Spiteful isn't the only aircraft on your test schedule, Major. We have 9 others for you to evaluate, each one documented with the same scientific rigor: speed, altitude, configuration, what we call receipts, hard numbers tied to specific conditions. He produced another clipboard, a list, 10 aircraft, 10 sets of performance data. Harrison scanned it, most of the names he recognized: Spitfire variants, Hawker fighters, the Mosquito, but the speeds listed next to them made his stomach tighten. You're telling me all of these are faster than our fighters? I'm not telling you anything, Major. The data will speak for itself. All I ask is that you test them honestly. Fly them yourself, record the results, then draw your own conclusions. Pemberton's eyes held something Harrison would later recognize as a challenge. Not hostile, more like a teacher presenting a student with a problem that will force growth. We'll begin tomorrow, weather permitting. You'll start with number 10 on the list and work your way up. That way, if you choose to terminate the evaluation early, you'll have flown the slower aircraft first. Harrison looked at the list again. Number 10 was a Westland Welkin, 385 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Not faster than a Mustang, but respectable. Number 1 was the Spiteful, 483. His hands tightened on the clipboard. Tomorrow he would begin to learn whether his confidence had been built on truth or propaganda. December 15th, 1944. First flight. Harrison woke before dawn in the officers' quarters, a converted country house that still bore traces of its peacetime elegance. High ceilings, wood paneling, the kind of place that reminded you Britain had been fighting this war longer than America, sacrificing gracious living to the demands of survival. He dressed in his flight suit, USAAF patch on the shoulder, wings over his heart, rank insignia that spoke of years earned in cockpits and classrooms, and the brutal calculus of aerial combat. Breakfast was British. Powdered eggs, toast that tasted like cardboard, tea instead of coffee. Harrison ate mechanically, his mind already in the air, running through pre-flight protocols and performance expectations. A young officer joined him at the table. Flight Lieutenant David Thornbury, 28 years old, Cambridge educated, the kind of engineer who could talk about aerodynamics with the passion other men reserved for football or women. Morning, Major. Ready for your first evaluation. As ready as I'll ever be. Thornbury smiled. There was genuine warmth in it, none of the competitive edge Harrison had expected. You're starting with the Welkin, yes, interesting choice. Commander Pemberton's suggestion. Work up from the bottom. Ah, yes, that makes sense. Thornbury poured himself tea-added milk in that peculiar British ratio that always looked wrong to American eyes. The Welkin is a specialized bird major, high-altitude interceptor, built for a very specific mission profile. You won't see its best performance unless you take it up past 25,000 feet. Harrison filed that away. Altitude mattered. He knew that from flying Mustangs. But the Welkin's design philosophy sounded different. Purpose-built for thin air rather than adaptable across altitudes. What's the catch? The catch. There's always a catch. High-altitude specialist usually means it handles like a pig at low level. Thornbury laughed. Quite right. The Welkin is brilliant at 26,000 feet. Anywhere below 15,000, you'd rather be in almost anything else. They finished breakfast and walked to the flight line. The Welkin sat waiting, its twin Merlin engines gleaming under work lights. Long wings, pressurized cockpit, an aircraft that looked designed by someone who understood physics but had never considered aesthetics. Harrison did his walk-around. Control surfaces, tires, fuel load, the same ritual he had performed hundreds of times before combat missions. Muscle memory mixed with superstition, mixed with genuine safety protocol. A sergeant helped him strap in. British harness configuration. Different from American systems, but logical once you understood the layout. Thornbury appeared at the wing route, clipboard in hand. Weather's clear above 10,000 feet. Wind's light and variable. Perfect conditions for a speed run. What's the target altitude? 26,000 feet. That's where the Welkin shows its true colors. Harrison nodded. Began the start sequence. Port engine coughed, settled into a steady roar. Starboard followed. The aircraft trembled with contained power. He taxied to the runway, feeling the controls, getting acquainted with how this particular bird wanted to move. Every aircraft had personality. The good pilots learned to listen. Tower cleared him for takeoff. Harrison pushed the throttles forward. The Welkin accelerated with surprising eagerness, hungry for altitude. At 80 knots, he pulled back gently. The nose lifted. The wheels left Earth. England dropped away beneath him. Climbing through 15,000 feet, Harrison understood what Thornbury meant. The controls felt mushy, imprecise, like flying through syrup. But as he passed 20,000, something changed. The air thinned. The Welkin came alive. At 26,000 feet, he leveled off and pushed the throttles to maximum continuous power. The speed built. 350, 360, 375. He held altitude, precisely watching the instruments, feeling the aircraft settle into its element. At this height, in this thin, cold air, the Welkin flew like it had been designed by someone who understood exactly what happened to wings and engines when oxygen became scarce. 385 miles per hour. The needle held steady. Harrison maintained the speed for 2 minutes, long enough to confirm it wasn't a fluke or a momentary spike. This was real performance, documented and repeatable. He descended, landed, taxied back to the hangar. Thornbury met him with hot tea and a data sheet. How was she? Harrison pulled off his gloves, accepted the tea gratefully. Honest, that's the word. The Welkin does exactly what it's designed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. And the speed, 385 at 26,000, just like your data said. Thornberry made notes. Excellent. That's our baseline. Number 10 on the list. Tomorrow you'll fly number 9. Harrison sipped his tea, processing. The Welkin wasn't faster than a Mustang at combat altitudes, but it was faster than a Mustang at its designed altitude. Different tools for different jobs. Maybe the British weren't competing with American designs. Maybe they were solving different problems. That thought should have prepared him for what came next. It didn't. December 16, Spitfire LM F Mark 9E. This was the aircraft Harrison recognized. The Spitfire that had fought the Battle of Britain. The fighter that appeared in newsreels and propaganda posters. The symbol of British resistance that Americans knew almost as well as their own aircraft. He expected sentiment to cloud his judgment. Expected the romance of the Spitfire legend to interfere with scientific evaluation. Instead, he found himself surprised by honesty. The Mark 9E climbed smoothly to 21,000 feet. Harrison leveled off, checked his instruments, pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin engine sang. That was the only word for it. Not roared, not growled, sang. A mechanical symphony that spoke of precision engineering and thousands of hours of refinement. The speed climbed. 390, 400, 404 miles per hour. Harrison held it there, watching the instruments, feeling the aircraft's behavior. Stable, responsive, balanced in a way that made speed feel effortless. 404, not faster than his Mustang. The P-51D could hit 437 at 25,000 feet, but the Spitfire wasn't embarrassing itself either. 404 was respectable, professional, the kind of number that said British engineers knew their business. He descended his mind, working through implications. Thornberry met him on the tarmac, grinning. Well, William, 404, exactly as advertised. And, Harrison paused, choosing words carefully, it's a good aircraft, honest performance, nothing to apologize for. Thornberry's grin widened. That's number 9 Major, the slowest entry on our list. The words hit Harrison like a fist. If number 9 did 404, what in God's name did number 1 do? He knew. The clipboard said 483, but knowing intellectually and understanding viscerally were different things. Tomorrow, Thornberry said cheerfully, you'll fly the Typhoon. Number 8, 412 at 19,000 feet. Harrison walked back to the operations building, his mind churning. The pattern was becoming clear. Each British fighter had been optimized for specific conditions. Altitude, speed, mission profile. Not trying to be everything to everyone, but excelling at defined tasks. American fighters like the Mustang had been designed for versatility, long range, good performance across altitudes. Adequate in most situations, excellent in the scenarios that mattered for bomber escort. Different philosophies, different solutions. But if the British had actually built a fighter that exceeded American speed across the board, that changed the conversation entirely. December 17, Hawker Typhoon. Harrison had heard stories about the Typhoon. Ground attack beast, rocket platform. The kind of aircraft that won battles through brute force rather than elegance. Sitting in the cockpit, he understood immediately why pilots talked about it with mixed respect and caution. The Napier Sabre engine was a monster. 24 cylinders arranged in an H configuration that produced over 2,000 horsepower when pushed. The kind of power that could overcome aerodynamic sins through sheer mechanical violence. Harrison took it up to 19,000 feet. The climb was labored, the aircraft feeling heavy and reluctant. But at altitude, when he leveled off and pushed the throttle forward, something changed. The Typhoon accelerated like a truck rolling downhill. Not graceful, not refined, but undeniably brutally fast. 412 miles per hour. The controls felt heavy. The aircraft wanted to wander. Harrison had to work to keep it steady using muscle and concentration, where the Spitfire had required only gentle touches. But 412 was 412. Faster than he'd expected. Faster than it had any right to be given its agricultural handling. He landed, muscles sore from fighting the controls, and found himself reassessing assumptions. The Typhoon proved that speed could be achieved through multiple paths. The British hadn't prioritized handling or elegance. They'd asked, how fast can we make this thing go in a straight line while carrying bombs and rockets? And they'd found an answer that worked. Thornberry was waiting with his eternal clipboard. 412. Close enough, maybe 410. Hard to tell with that beast wandering all over the sky. She's a handful, isn't she? That's diplomatic. Thornberry laughed. Tomorrow you'll fly something more refined. The Tempest, Mark II, 442 at 15,200 feet. Harrison stopped walking. Say that again. 442 at 15,200 feet. That's combat altitude. Yes. Harrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Mustang could hit 437, but that was at 25,000 feet. At 15,000, it was slower. Maybe 410, 415. If the Tempest could truly hit 442 at 15,000 feet, that meant it was faster than the Mustang where actual combat happened, where German fighters lurked, where battles were won and lost. I'll believe it when I see it. Thornberry just smiled. December 18th, 1944. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of English winter day where frost painted the grass silver and breath hung visible in the air like small ghosts. Harrison walked to the flight line before sunrise, coffee substitute warming his hands through a tin mug. The Tempest waited in the pre-dawn darkness, looking like exactly what it was. A weapon. No elegance, no romance, just the brutal practicality of an aircraft designed to kill at altitudes where most of the killing happened. Thornberry appeared beside him, materializing out of the morning mist with his inevitable clipboard. Sleep well, Major. Well enough. That was a lie. Harrison had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling of his quarters doing mathematics in his head. 4 aircraft tested, 4 aircraft that had met or exceeded their documented performance. The pattern was undeniable. British test data was solid, which meant the remaining 6 aircraft on the list were probably just as honest about their capabilities. Which meant, number 1, the Spitfire really could hit 483 miles per hour. Which meant everything Colonel Morrison believed about American air superiority needed reassessment. The Tempest is different from what you've flown so far, Thornberry said, watching Harrison's face in the growing light. The others were specialists, high-altitude birds mostly. The Tempest was built for a different war. What war is that? The one that happens at 15,000 feet, where German fighters actually live, where the real killing gets done. Harrison felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that war intimately. Had fought it over France and Germany, where F-109s and FW-190s lurked in the middle altitudes waiting for bomber formations or unwary fighters. The Mustang was good there, better than good. It had dominated that battle space for 2 years, given American pilots the edge they needed to come home alive. But if the Tempest was faster at 15,000 feet, that changed the equation entirely. 442, Harrison said quietly. That's what your data claims. That's what the data shows. Documented, verified, repeatable. At 15,200 feet. Yes. Harrison drained his coffee, handed the mug to a passing sergeant. Let's find out if it's true. The pre-flight check revealed an aircraft built for punishment. Heavy gauge metal, robust control surfaces, an engine that looked like it had been designed to survive sustained combat operations rather than impress engineers with theoretical efficiency. Harrison strapped in. The Napier Sabre engine caught with a snarl that was more predator than machine. 24 cylinders, 2,400 horsepower. The kind of power that gave pilots options when options meant survival. He taxied to the runway, feeling the weight of the aircraft, the solid planted feel of something built to take damage and keep flying. The Tempest didn't want to be graceful, it wanted to be effective. Tower cleared him for takeoff. Harrison released brakes and pushed the throttle forward. The Tempest surged down the runway with purposeful acceleration, not the eager leap of a Spitfire, but the determined charge of something heavier and more committed. At 100 knots he rotated. The nose lifted. England dropped away. He climbed at a shallow angle, watching the altimeter, feeling how the aircraft handled at different heights. Below 10,000 feet, it felt heavy muscular, like flying a well-trained boxer. Between 10 and 15,000 something changed. The Tempest found its sweet spot. At 15,200 feet, Harrison leveled off and trimmed for level flight. The aircraft settled into a steady cruise, waiting for instructions. He pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Sabre engine roared, not sang like the Merlin in the Spitfire. Roared, a sound of contained violence and mechanical fury. The speed climbed, 400, 410, 420. Harrison watched the instruments with the focus of a man whose life had depended on reading instruments accurately. Airspeed, altitude, engine temperature, oil pressure, every gauge telling a story. 430, 440. The Tempest felt solid, planted like it was built for this exact speed at this exact altitude. No flutter in the controls, no wandering tendency, just smooth, fast, honest flight, 442 miles per hour. Harrison held it there, his mind doing calculations he didn't want to complete. The P-51D Mustang at 15,000 feet could hit maybe 415 miles per hour, maybe 420 on a good day with a clean aircraft in favorable conditions. The Tempest was doing 442, right now, repeatably, consistently. At combat altitude where battles actually happened, this British fighter was faster than anything America had. Harrison maintained the speed for 3 minutes, long enough to be certain, long enough to eliminate any doubt. Then he throttled back and began his descent, his worldview shifting like tectonic plates under pressure. He landed in silence, taxied to the apron, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands on the control stick, breathing. Thornberry was waiting when he finally climbed down. Well, Harrison pulled off his gloves, slowly, precisely buying time to find words. 442, maybe 443. Hard to tell exactly at that speed. Thornberry made a note. Altitude, 15,200, within 50 feet. And your assessment? Harrison looked at the Tempest, at its blunt nose and thick wings, and the general impression of an aircraft that had never pretended to be anything but a weapon. It's faster than a Mustang, at the altitude where it matters. The words hung in the cold December air between them. Thornberry nodded slowly, understanding what that admission cost. Yes, it is. They walked back to the operations building in silence. Harrison felt something fundamental shifting inside him, like a building settling on a new foundation. Not collapse, just adjustment. The kind of reassessment that happens when evidence overwrites belief. At the door, Thornberry paused. Major, you have 6 more aircraft to test. Numbers 7 through 2 are all faster than the Tempest, and number 1 is faster than all of them. Harrison nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Take the afternoon off. You've earned it. Tomorrow we'll fly the Mosquito. That evening, Harrison sat in his quarters with a sheet of paper and a pen, trying to write a letter home to Eleanor. The words came slowly. Darling, I'm not sure how much of this I'm allowed to tell you, but I need to tell someone before it drives me crazy. I came to England to prove a point, to show that American aircraft are the best in the world. Superior engineering, superior performance. The kind of truth that justifies our pride and our sacrifices. He paused, staring at the paper. But Eleanor, what if that's not entirely true? What if our allies, these British pilots and engineers who've been fighting this war longer than we have, what if they've built aircraft that exceed ours in some ways? Not always. The Mustang is still a remarkable machine. But in pure speed at the altitudes where combat actually happens, some of these British fighters are faster. The admission felt like betrayal, but also like relief. I don't know what to do with this information. Colonel Morrison expects me to come back with proof of American superiority, but I'm a test pilot, not a propagandist. My job is to fly aircraft and report what they actually do, not what I wish they would do. He thought about the Tempest, about 442 miles per hour, at 15,000 feet, about all the Mustang pilots who believed they were flying the fastest fighter in the squad. The British approach speed differently than we do. We build with power and versatility. They build with precision and purpose. Different philosophies, both effective. Maybe that's the real lesson here, that there's more than one way to solve a problem, and sometimes the solution you didn't expect works better than the one you assumed was best. He signed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to Amarillo, Texas, and set it aside for the morning mail run. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from a bottle Morrison had given him before deployment and sat staring out the window at the English countryside, wondering what truth was worth. December 19th, the Mosquito. Harrison had heard about the Mosquito before he arrived in England. The wooden wonder, plywood and balsa wood construction in an era of aluminum and steel. It sounded like desperation, like making do with inferior materials because the good stuff was needed elsewhere. Standing next to the aircraft on the flight line, he understood how wrong that assumption had been. The Mosquito looked fast, sitting still. Smooth lines, twin Merlin engines, a design that suggested someone had drawn the shape of speed and then figured out how to make it fly. Thornberry appeared grinning like a man with a secret. This one surprises everyone, Major. How so? Because it's made of wood. Pilots see that and think it's fragile, obsolete, a last resort. Then they fly it and discover it's faster than most metal fighters. 424 at 26,500 feet. That's what your data says. That's what it does. Night fighter variant, this one, carries radar guns, observer, still hits 424. Harrison walked around the aircraft, slowly looking for flaws, for signs of corner cutting or compromise. Found none. The construction was meticulous. Joints tight, surfaces smooth, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of pride and precision. Why would WWII? Thornberry shrugged. Shortage of aluminum early in the war. But also wood has advantages. Lighter than metal for equivalent strength, easier to repair in the field. And if you shape it properly, very smooth surfaces, less drag than riveted aluminum. Different solution to the same problem. Exactly. The flight up to 26,500 feet was revelation. The Mosquito climbed eagerly, the twin Merlins pulling smoothly, the wooden airframe responding to controls with precision that felt almost delicate compared to the brutal Tempest. At altitude, Harrison leveled off and pushed the throttles forward. The speed climbed with surprising ease. 400, 410, 420, 424 miles per hour. A wooden aircraft built from trees and glue and engineering cleverness, flying faster than most American fighters. Faster than it had any right to be, according to conventional wisdom about materials and construction. Harrison maintained the speed, his mind working through implications. The British hadn't been making do with inferior materials. They'd been solving problems differently, taking what they had, wood and precision engineering and centuries of furniture, making expertise and turning it into aircraft that worked. American industry had gone all in on aluminum and mass production. Thousands of aircraft rolling off assembly lines, standardized construction, replaceable parts, the manufacturing philosophy that had won the war in logistics and numbers. But the British, with fewer resources and less industrial capacity, had focused on getting more from less, on optimization rather than scale. Both approaches worked. Both produced aircraft that could fight and win, just in different ways. He landed the Mosquito with new respect for wooden construction and British ingenuity and found Thornberry waiting with something other than his usual clipboard. A telegram. "This came for you an hour ago, Major, from London." Harrison took it, already knowing what it would say before he opened it. "Arriving Boscombe down December 20. Stop, expect full briefing on evaluation progress. Stop Morrison." December 20th. Colonel Morrison arrived at noon in a staff car looking like a thunderstorm compressed into human form. Harrison met him at the operations building. Saluted. Received a salute in return that carried all the warmth of winter rain. "Walk with me, Major." They walked away from the buildings out toward the airfield perimeter, where conversations could be private. Morrison didn't speak until they were well clear of anyone who might overhear. "I've been reading your preliminary reports." "Yes, sir." "You've tested 7 aircraft so far, and according to your data, 5 of them meet or exceed their claimed performance specifications." "That's correct, sir." Morrison stopped walking, turned to face Harrison directly. "Do you understand what you're doing?" "Sir, you're providing ammunition for the British to claim their aircraft are superior to ours. You're giving Congress reasons to question American procurement. You're undermining confidence in the aircraft that won us air superiority over Europe." Harrison felt anger rising, pushed it down, kept his voice level. "Sir, with respect, I'm reporting what the aircraft actually do. That's my job. Your job is to evaluate British fighters and determine if they pose a competitive threat to American aviation supremacy." "They're not a threat, sir. They're our allies." Morrison's face darkened. "Don't be naive, Jim. After the war ends, we're all competitors again. Economics, trade, influence. If British aircraft manufacturers can claim their fighters are faster than ours, that affects sales, export markets, national prestige. So you want me to lie? The word hung between them like an accusation. Morrison's jaw tightened. I want you to remember who you serve. The United States Army Air Forces, not the Royal Air Force. I serve the truth, sir, same as I did every time I climbed into a cockpit over Germany. If I start lying about what aircraft can do, pilots die. Maybe not today, maybe not in this war, but somewhere, sometime, a pilot will make a decision based on false information and it'll kill him. That's not your concern. It's exactly my concern. It's the only thing that should be any test pilot's concern. They stood facing each other on the cold English airfield, two American officers with fundamentally different ideas about duty. Morrison spoke quietly with the kind of controlled fury that was more dangerous than shouting. You have 3 aircraft left to test. When you're done, you will write a report that acknowledges British aircraft have certain performance advantage in specific conditions, while making clear that American fighters remain superior for overall mission effectiveness. Versatility, range, reliability, the qualities that actually win wars. And if the data doesn't support that conclusion, make it support it. You're smart enough to frame numbers any way you want. Harrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. No, sir, I'm not going to do that. Morrison stepped closer, voice dropping to barely above whisper. Let me be very clear, Major. Your cooperation on this matter will be remembered when we discuss your post-war career. Your lack of cooperation will also be remembered. Am I understood? Perfectly, sir. Morrison stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the staff car. Harrison stood alone on the airfield, watching his commanding officer leave, knowing he had just chosen a path that would cost him, but knowing also that some things mattered more than career. That night, Sergeant Mike O'Brien found Harrison in the enlisted men's mess, nursing a cup of coffee and looking like a man who'd lost a fight. O'Brien was from Boston, 24 years old, a mechanic who'd been assigned to support Harrison's evaluation program. Good hands with engines. Better sense of when an officer needed someone to talk to who wasn't part of the command structure. Rough day, sir. Harrison looked up. You could say that. O'Brien poured himself coffee, sat down uninvited. That was the thing about good sergeants. They knew when protocol mattered and when it didn't. I heard Colonel Morrison was here. News travels fast. Small base, sir, and the colonel wasn't exactly quiet when he left. Harrison smiled despite himself. No, I don't suppose he was. They sat in silence for a moment. Then O'Brien spoke carefully. Sir, I've been working with the British ground crews, talking to their mechanics. They're good people, know their stuff, and they're not trying to make American aircraft look bad. They just built different solutions to the same problems. I know. The Tempest one prepped for you yesterday. The crew chief told me it was designed specifically because Spitfires couldn't catch WWIIs at low altitude. The Germans were hitting coastal targets and running before the RAF could intercept. So Hawker built the Tempest to be faster where it mattered. Harrison nodded slowly. Different mission, different solution. Exactly, sir. It's not about being better. It's about being right for the job. O'Brien drained his coffee. I don't know what the colonel wants from you, sir, but I know you're the most honest pilot I've ever worked with. Whatever you decide to put in that report, I know it'll be the truth. He stood, picked up his cup. And sir, the truth is worth something, even when it costs. He walked away, leaving Harrison alone with his thoughts and his coffee and the weight of decisions not yet made. December 21st. Spitfire Mark 14. Harrison had flown Spitfires before the earlier Marks, the ones with Merlin engines that sang. But the Mark 14 was different. Griffin engine. More power, more speed. The evolution of an icon into something harder, faster, less forgiving. Thornberry briefed him before the flight. The Mark 14 represents a significant leap. Merlin to Griffin, 1,200 horsepower to over 2,000. Everything else had to be strengthened to handle the power. Heavier airframe, stiffer controls. It's not the Spitfire that fought the Battle of Britain anymore. 449 at 24,500 feet. Yes, documented, repeatable. Harrison climbed into the cockpit, settled into the seat, and immediately felt the difference. The Mark 14 felt more solid, less delicate than the Mark 9 he'd flown earlier. This was the Spitfire's answer to American fighters. More muscle, less grace. The Griffin started with a deeper note than the Merlin, a bass rumble that spoke of displacement and power. Harrison taxied out, took off, climbed through layers of cloud toward clear sky. At 24,500 feet, the Mark 14 came alive. He pushed the throttle forward and watched the speed climb. 420, 430, 445, 449 miles per hour, faster than a Mustang at this altitude, faster than any Spitfire variant he'd known existed. This was the future of piston engine fighters. Maximum power, maximum speed. The absolute limit of what could be extracted from propeller-driven aircraft. Harrison held the speed, feeling the aircraft's behavior, noting the heavy controls and the sense of flying something that had been pushed right to the edge of its structural limits. This was what happened when you took an elegant design and demanded it compete with American brute force engineering. You lost some of the elegance. You gained raw performance. Trade-offs. Always trade-offs. He descended, landed, walked to the debriefing room where Thornberry waited. 449, just like you said. And Harrison sat down, suddenly tired. It's fast, very fast, but it's not a Spitfire anymore. Not the way people think of Spitfires. It's something else, something harder. Thornberry nodded, understanding. The price of evolution. Tomorrow you'll fly the Mark 21, the final development of the Spitfire line. 454 miles per hour. Faster still. Yes, and then the Sea Fury, the Hornet, and finally the Spiteful. Harrison looked at the remaining entries on the list, at the climbing numbers, at the approaching moment when he would have to decide what truth was worth. How many of these aircraft will actually see combat? Thornberry paused. Honestly, maybe none. The war is nearly over. Jets are coming. These represent the absolute peak of piston engine technology, but they're already obsolete. Then why test them? Because the data matters. Because understanding what's possible matters. Because someday someone will want to know exactly how fast we could make piston fighters go before we moved on to something else. Harrison thought about that. About building aircraft that would never fight. About pursuing perfection that would never be used. About the strange nobility of doing something excellently even when it didn't matter anymore. Tomorrow then, the Mark 21. December 22nd, Spitfire F, Mark 21, the last Spitfire, the final answer to the question of how far the basic design could be pushed. Griffin 61 engine, redesigned wing, every lesson learned from 6 years of war poured into one aircraft, 454 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Harrison climbed through winter, sky leveled at altitude, pushed the throttle forward. The speed climbed past 440, past 450, settled at 450 core. The fastest Spitfire ever built. Faster than American fighters at this height. The absolute pinnacle of what British engineers could extract from the concept that had saved Britain in 1940. And Harrison felt flying it that it had lost something essential in the pursuit of speed. The Mark 21 was competent, professional, effective, but it wasn't inspired. It was the Spitfire's answer to a question that didn't need answering anymore. He landed, debriefed, and made his decision. That evening, he sat in his quarters and began writing his final report. Not the report Morrison wanted, the report truth demanded. To Colonel Frank Morrison, USAAF, I have completed evaluation of 10 British fighter aircraft. The data is attached. All aircraft met or exceeded their documented performance specifications. The fastest aircraft tested was the Supermarine Spiteful F Mark 14 at 483 miles per hour. This exceeds the maximum speed of the P-51D Mustang by 46 miles per hour. He paused, choosing words carefully. However, speed is not the only measure of combat effectiveness. American fighters excel in areas the British design sacrifice. Range, versatility, ease of production, maintainability. The P-51 Mustang remains the superior aircraft for bomber escort missions due to its range and reliability. Another pause. What this evaluation demonstrates is that Allied cooperation produces better results than Allied competition. British engineers have developed solutions to problems American engineers approach differently. Both solutions work. Both have merit. The strongest Air Force would incorporate lessons from both traditions. He signed it, sealed it, and knew he had just ended whatever career he'd hoped to have after the war. But he also knew he would sleep that night. Some things were worth more than advancement. December 23, 1944. 3 aircraft remained. Harrison woke before dawn knowing these would be the flights that defined everything. The Sea Fury, the Hornet, the Spiteful, the 3 fastest piston fighters Britain had built. The ones that would prove beyond any remaining doubt that American air superiority was more assumption than fact. Breakfast was quiet. Most of the British officers had gone home for Christmas leave. The mess hall felt empty, echoing with the ghosts of conversations not happening. Thornberry found him at the coffee urn. Ready for the Sea Fury, Harrison nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They walked to the hangar in silence. The Sea Fury sat waiting, bathed in work lights, looking like violence contained in metal. Hawker's final answer to the question of how much power could be packed into a single-engine fighter. Bristol Centaurus radial, 18 cylinders, 2,700 horsepower, 460 miles per hour at 18,000 feet, Thornberry said quietly. The most refined piston fighter we ever built. Harrison did his walk-around inspection, wrote his mind already in the air. This was it. The moment when British engineering would prove it could match American performance, not in specialized conditions, but across the board. The Sea Fury was designed for carrier operations, which meant it had to be good at everything. Takeoff, landing, combat at multiple altitudes, durability, and it was faster than anything America had. He strapped in. The Centaurus started with a sound like controlled thunder, deeper than the Merlin, more visceral than the Griffin, the sound of power that didn't apologize for existing. Harrison taxied to the runway, feeling the weight of the aircraft, the solid competence of something built by people who knew exactly what they were doing. No wasted motion, no unnecessary complexity, just pure function wrapped in metal. Tower cleared him for takeoff. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Sea Fury surged down the runway with authority that made everything else he'd flown seem tentative. This aircraft didn't ask permission. It took what it needed and made the sky accommodate. At 18,000 feet, Harrison leveled off and prepared himself for what he knew was coming. Throttle forward. The Bristol Centaurus roared. The aircraft accelerated with smooth inevitability, like gravity had decided to pull horizontally instead of down. 430, 440, 450, 460 miles per hour. Harrison held it there, watching the instruments, feeling the aircraft's behavior. Rock solid, no vibration, no tendency to wander or hunt. Just clean, honest, devastating speed. The most refined piston fighter ever built. That's what Thornberry had called it. Flying it, Harrison understood. This was what happened when you took 6 years of combat experience, every lesson learned from every engagement, every pilot report, every mechanical failure, and poured all of it into one design. The Sea Fury was the answer to a question that wouldn't be asked much longer. In a year, maybe 2 jets would make piston fighters obsolete. But for this moment, for this aircraft, British engineering had reached perfection. Harrison descended slowly, not wanting the flight to end, knowing it marked something. Not just the end of piston fighter development, but the end of certainty. The comfortable belief that American technology stood alone at the pinnacle of achievement. He landed, taxied to the apron, shut down the engine. Sat in the cockpit, remembering the Sea Fury's speed, its handling, its absolute competence at the one thing it was designed to do. Thornberry was waiting with hot coffee and understanding. Well, 460, maybe 461. Hard to tell at that speed. And your assessment, Harrison climbed down from the cockpit, accepted the coffee, looked back at the Sea Fury. It's the best piston fighter I've ever flown. Better than the Mustang, better than anything we have. The words came easier than he'd expected. Not betrayal, just truth. Thornberry nodded slowly. Tomorrow you'll fly the Hornet, twin engine, 472 miles per hour, and then the Spiteful. Yes, 483, the fastest of all. Harrison drank his coffee, tasting nothing, his mind already working through what the next 2 days would bring. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The Hornet. Most of the British personnel had gone home to families. The base felt abandoned skeletal crew maintaining essential operations while everyone else celebrated what might be the last wartime Christmas. Harrison stood alone on the flight line at sunrise, looking at the de Havilland Hornet, twin Merlin engines, wooden construction like the Mosquito, but refined, optimized, pushed to the absolute limit of what could be done with plywood and precision engineering. 472 miles per hour, faster than anything America had built, faster than metal fighters with their riveted aluminum and modern construction techniques. A wooden aircraft built from trees exceeding the performance of the most advanced metal designs. Pemberton appeared beside him the first time Harrison had seen the wing commander in 3 days. "Major, I thought you might want company for this flight." "I wouldn't mind it, sir." They stood together in the cold morning, watching frost melt on the Hornet's wings as sunlight touched metal and wood. "The Hornet represents something important," Pemberton said quietly. "Not just speed, though it's very fast. It represents the British approach to engineering. We don't always have the resources America has, the aluminum, the production capacity, so we use what we have and make it exceptional. Wood, wood, and skill, and hundreds of years of furniture making tradition turn toward aviation. The joiners who built this aircraft learned their craft making cabinets and tables. Then they applied those skills to building the fastest twin-engine fighter in the world." Harrison thought about that, about tradition and innovation combined, about taking old skills and applying them to new problems. In America, we'd call that making do. In Britain, we call it ingenuity. Pemberton smiled, but there was something sad in it. After the war, major wood construction will disappear. Jets and aluminum will be the future. The Hornet represents the end of an era, the last and best of something that won't exist much longer. Harrison felt the weight of that, flying an aircraft that represented the peak of a dying tradition. Then I'd better do it justice. The pre-flight was meticulous. Twin engines meant double the systems to check. Wooden construction meant looking for things metal aircraft didn't worry about. Moisture, joint integrity, surface condition. Everything was perfect. The Hornet had been maintained with the kind of care reserved for aircraft that mattered. Harrison climbed in, started both. Merlins listened to them synchronize into a harmony that spoke of matched precision. Twin engines running in perfect balance, producing power smoothly, efficiently, without drama. Takeoff was revelation. The Hornet leaped into the air like it had been waiting impatiently for permission to fly. Light despite its twin engines. Eager. Responsive in a way that suggested the designers had found some perfect balance between power and weight. At 22,000 feet, Harrison leveled off and pushed both throttles forward. The Merlin sang. Both of them, a duet of mechanical perfection. The speed climbed. 440, 450, 460, 472 miles per hour. Harrison's hands tightened on the control wheel. This was it, the second fastest aircraft on the list. A wooden twin-engine fighter exceeding the performance of single-engine metal aircraft. Proof that different approaches to the same problem could produce equally valid, equally brilliant solutions. He maintained the speed for 5 minutes long enough to be absolutely certain, then throttled back and began his descent. Landing the Hornet felt like saying goodbye to something irreplaceable, a wooden aircraft that could fly 472 miles per hour. After the war, nothing like it would ever be built again. Pemberton met him on the tarmac. "Your thoughts, Major?" Harrison pulled off his gloves, slowly buying time to organize feelings into words. "It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And you're right, after the war, no one will build anything like it again, which seems like a terrible waste. Perhaps, or perhaps it means we got it exactly right, exactly once, and that's enough." They walked back to the operations building together. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, and the day after Harrison would fly the Spitfire, the fastest piston fighter ever built. The aircraft that would prove finally and irrevocably that British engineering had achieved something America had not. December 26. The Spitfire. Christmas had passed in strange isolation. Harrison had spent it alone in his quarters writing letters home, thinking about truth and career and what mattered more. Now he stood in the hangar with the Spiteful, and all those philosophical questions seemed distant. 483 miles per hour. The number was painted on Thornberry's clipboard in neat handwriting. Documented, verified, repeatable. The fastest level flight speed ever recorded by a piston engine fighter. And it was British. The Spiteful didn't look revolutionary at first glance. It carried the supermarine name, the heritage of the Spitfire. But looking closer, Harrison saw how different it truly was. The wings were thinner, sharper, optimized for laminar flow in a way the Spitfire's elliptical wings had never been. The fuselage was longer, cleaner. Every line suggested someone had taken the concept of a fighter and stripped away everything that wasn't speed. Thornberry appeared with hot tea and final briefing notes. "This is it, Major. The last flight. #1 on the list. Tell me about the name. Spiteful. That's deliberate, isn't it? Playing on Spitfire." Thornberry smiled. "Very deliberate. Marketing, really. If we'd called it something completely new, the Air Ministry might have rejected it as too radical. But by linking it to the Spitfire name, we got approval for what is essentially a completely new aircraft. So it's not really a Spitfire at all. Not even close. Different wing, different aerodynamics, different design philosophy. The Spitfire was about balance and agility. The Spiteful is about pure speed, laminar flow wings, radical drag reduction, everything subordinated to going as fast as possible." Harrison circled the aircraft, slowly seeing it with new understanding. This was British engineering at its absolute peak, taking the legacy of the Spitfire and using it as cover to build something genuinely revolutionary. 483 miles per hour. That's 46 miles per hour faster than a P-51D. Yes. Faster than anything America has built. Yes. Harrison looked at Thornberry directly. "You knew this all along. You knew I'd come here believing American aircraft were superior and you'd prove me wrong." Thornberry met his gaze steadily. "We knew the data. We didn't know if you'd believe it, or report it honestly if you did. And if I don't, then the truth stays classified and nothing changes. American pilots keep believing they fly the fastest fighters. British pilots know better but can't say anything, and neither side learns from the other." Harrison thought about Morrison's visit, about the pressure to frame data favorably, about career consequences, and national pride, and all the reasons people chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. "I'm going to report it honestly. All of it, whatever it costs." Thornberry extended his hand. "Then you're a better man than your rank requires, Major." They shook hands. Then Harrison climbed into the Spiteful's cockpit and prepared to fly the fastest piston fighter ever built. The Griffin engine started cleanly. Harrison taxied out, ran through final checks, received clearance from the tower. Takeoff was smooth. The Spiteful lifted off with the kind of grace that came from perfect design rather than excess power. It didn't muscle into the air. It simply stopped touching the ground. Climbed to 21,000 feet, felt effortless. The aircraft wanted to be there in the thin air where its laminar flow wings could work their magic. Harrison leveled off, trimmed for level flight, took a deep breath, then pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Griffin roared. The Spiteful accelerated like physics had decided to make an exception. 450, 460, 470, 483 miles per hour. Harrison held it there, barely breathing, watching the instruments confirm what he was feeling. This was the limit, the absolute pinnacle of what could be extracted from a piston engine and propeller. Technology pushed to its theoretical maximum, and it was beautiful. Not just the speed, though, that was remarkable. The way the aircraft handled at that speed. Solid, stable, no flutter, no vibration, just smooth flight at a velocity that would have torn lesser designs apart. British engineers had built this, with fewer resources than America, less industrial capacity, smaller budgets, but with skill and precision and a refusal to accept that there were limits to what could be achieved. Harrison maintained 483 miles per hour for 3 minutes, long enough to be certain beyond any doubt. Then he throttled back, began his descent, and knew that when he landed, everything would be different. January 1945. Harrison submitted his final report. The response was immediate and predictable. Morrison was furious, called him insubordinate, threatened court-martial, suggested his career was finished. Harrison accepted it all with calm he hadn't known he possessed. He had flown 10 aircraft, documented their performance honestly, reported the truth without embellishment or spin. Some things were worth more than career advancement. But then something unexpected happened. A week after Morrison's threats, Harrison received new orders. Not court-martial, not reprimand. Assignment to a joint Anglo-American evaluation program. Apparently, someone higher in the Pentagon had read his report and drawn different conclusions than Morrison. Conclusions about the value of honest assessment, about learning from allies, about the strength that came from combining different engineering traditions rather than competing between them. Pemberton called him to his office the day the orders arrived. It seems your honesty was appreciated in some quarters, Major. Not all quarters. No, Colonel Morrison has been quite vocal about his displeasure. Harrison smiled despite himself. I imagine he has. Pemberton poured 2 glasses of whiskey, real scotch, not the rot gut that usually circulated on military bases. The war will be over soon, a few months at most. When it ends, there will be questions about what comes next, which aircraft to keep building, which programs to fund. Your report provides data those decisions can be based on. He handed Harrison a glass. You did something difficult, Major. You told the truth when lying would have been easier and more profitable. That matters. More than you know. They drank in silence for a moment. Then Pemberton spoke again. What will you do after the war? Harrison thought about Texas, about Eleanor, about a life that didn't involve flying experimental aircraft in foreign countries. Go home, maybe teach, pass on what I've learned to pilots who come after. Good. The next generation needs honest teachers. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Harrison stayed in England through the summer working on the Joint Evaluation Program, teaching American and British pilots to share knowledge rather than compete for supremacy. In August, Japan surrendered. The war was over. Truly over. Harrison received orders home in September. He packed his gear, said goodbye to Thornberry and Pemberton, and the British officers who had become friends rather than foreign colleagues. The night before he left, O'Brien found him in the officers' mess. Going home, sir. Tomorrow morning. O'Brien sat down uninvited the way he always did. I wanted to thank you, sir, for showing me that honesty matters, even when it costs. I'm not sure I showed you anything you didn't already know, Sergeant. Maybe, but seeing you actually do it, stand up to Colonel Morrison, risk your career for the truth that mattered. That's something I'll remember. They shook hands. Then O'Brien stood to leave, paused at the door. The British pilots, sir, they talk about you. Call you the American who proved friendship beats nationalism. Thought you'd want to know. He left before Harrison could respond. Edwards Air Force Base, California, 1950. 5 years after the war, Harrison stood in front of a classroom at the Air Force Test Pilot School, teaching the next generation of experimental aircraft pilots. The young men in front of him wore uniforms that said United States Air Force instead of Army Air Forces. The reorganization had happened in 1947, splitting aviation into its own service branch. Gentlemen, Harrison said, pacing in front of the blackboard where he'd written a list of 10 aircraft, I'm going to tell you about the fastest piston fighters of World War II, and I'm going to start by telling you that the fastest wasn't American. The classroom went silent. The Supermarine Spitfire F Mark 14, British design, 483 miles per hour at 21,000 feet, faster than the P-51 Mustang, faster than the P-47 Thunderbolt, faster than anything we built. He let that sink in. Now, does that mean British fighters were better than ours? No. It means they solved different problems differently. The Mustang was designed for range and versatility. The Spiteful was designed for pure speed. Both succeeded at what they were meant to do. A young captain raised his hand. Sir, why didn't we know about the Spiteful during the war? Because it was classified. Because it came too late to see combat. And because sometimes the best technology never gets used, it just proves what's possible. Harrison tapped the blackboard. The lesson here isn't that one nation builds better aircraft than another. The lesson is that honest evaluation matters. When I tested those British fighters, I could have lied. Made American planes look better, pleased my superiors. But then this classroom would be learning fiction instead of fact. He paused, looking at the young faces in front of him. Truth matters, gentlemen. in test flying and combat reporting, in every assessment you'll ever make. Because somewhere, sometime, a pilot's life will depend on information being accurate. And if you've lied even once, even for good reasons, someone dies. The class ended, the students filed out. Harrison stood alone in the classroom, looking at the list of aircraft on the blackboard, remembering December 1944 and the flights that had taught him what truth cost and why it was worth paying. England, 1965, 20 years after the war. Harrison returned to RAF Boscombe Down as a civilian consultant invited to speak at an air show commemorating the 20th anniversary of VE Day. He was 53 now, gray at the temples, carrying the weight of middle age and memory. Pemberton met him at the gate, retired now like Harrison, but still carrying himself with the posture of a man who had spent his life in service. Major Harrison, or should I say Professor Harrison. They shook hands, gripping firmly the handshake of men who had shared something important. Just Jim, please. I stopped being Major a long time ago. And I stopped being Wing Commander. Call me Arthur. They walked through the base together past buildings. Harrison remembered new structures that had been built since the war, all of it overlaid with memory and time. Thornberry wanted to be here, Pemberton said, but he's in America, actually, consulting for Boeing on their supersonic transport program. Good for him. He always was the smartest engineer I knew. He says the same about American designers. Says the SST project proves what you wrote in your report. That cooperation produces better results than competition. They reached the static display area where preserved aircraft sat in the English sun. Spitfires, Hurricanes, Mosquitoes, and in the place of honor restored to pristine condition, a Supermarine Spiteful F Mark 14. Harrison stopped staring at it. 20 years collapsed into nothing. He was 32 again, climbing into that cockpit, pushing the throttle forward, watching the speed climb to 483 miles per hour. A young boy stood next to the Spiteful, maybe 10 years old, looking up at the aircraft with wide eyes. Harrison's grandson, Tommy, visiting England for the first time. Grandpa, is this the one, the fastest? Harrison walked over, put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Yes, Tommy, this is the one. Faster than our planes. Faster than our planes for a while. The boy looked confused. But we're the best, right? America has the best planes. Harrison knelt down, meeting his grandson's eyes. Tommy, let me tell you something important. Being the best isn't about always being first. It's about being honest. When I tested this aircraft, I found out it was faster than American fighters. I could have lied about it, but I didn't, because truth matters more than pride. Did that make you sad that their plane was faster? Harrison looked up at the Spiteful, remembering. No, son. It made me proud. Proud that our friends were that good. Proud that we could learn from each other. That's what real strength is. Not pretending you're always the best, but being willing to learn from people who do things better. Tommy thought about that. So the British are our friends, our best friends. They were our allies in the war, and we're still allies now. That's worth more than being fastest. Pemberton joined them carrying a wrapped package. Jim, I have something for you. He handed over the package. Harrison unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a frame, and in the frame the original handwritten list from December 1944. 10 aircraft, 10 speeds, 10 altitudes. His own handwriting faded but still legible. At the bottom, a notation in Pemberton's hand. To Major James Harrison, USAAF, the American who taught us that truth flies faster than propaganda, RAF Boscombe, down 1945. Harrison felt his throat tighten. Arthur, I don't know what to say. Say you'll hang it somewhere your students can see it. Remind them why honesty matters. I will, I promise. They stood together in the English sun, an American and a Brit, veterans of a war long over, looking at aircraft that represented the peak of a technology already obsolete, and understanding that what they had preserved wasn't speed data. It was the principle that truth mattered more than pride. Texas, 1973. Harrison's funeral. The church in Amarillo was full. Old pilots, former students, family, friends, people whose lives had been touched by a man who had chosen honesty over advancement and never regretted it. Pemberton attended flying from England at 77 years old because some friendships transcended oceans and decades. Thornberry came from Seattle, where he worked as a consultant for the aerospace industry. At the reception after the service, Pemberton found Tommy, now 18 years old, preparing to enter the Air Force Academy. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man." "Yes, sir, he was." Pemberton handed him an envelope. "He asked me to give you this, if he passed, before I did." Tommy opened it, inside a letter in Harrison's handwriting. "Tommy, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, but I want you to understand something about the life I lived and the choices I made. In 1944, I was asked to lie for my country, to make American aircraft look better than they were, to put nationalism ahead of truth. I refused. It cost me promotions, opportunities, the kind of career I might have had if I'd been more flexible with facts. But it gave me something more valuable: self-respect, and the knowledge that no pilot ever died because I gave them false information. Choose truth always, even when it costs. Especially when it costs. That's the only way to live with yourself. Love, Grandpa." Tommy looked up at Pemberton, eyes wet. He really believed this. He lived it every day. That's why we're here. Because some men don't just talk about principles, they embody them. And the final image, archival footage from 1945. A Supermarine Spitfire and a P-51 Mustang flying in formation over English countryside. Two aircraft, two nations, two different solutions to the same problem of how to fly fast and fight well. And underneath narration in Harrison's voice from a lecture recorded years later, people ask me what I learned testing British fighters in 1944. I learned that excellence has no nationality, that truth matters more than pride, that the strongest partnerships are built on honest assessment, not comfortable lies. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fly into combat. It's stand in front of your superiors and tell them, "They're wrong. The Spitfire was faster than the Mustang. That's a fact. But the Mustang had better range, better versatility, better availability. Also facts. Both aircraft were excellent at what they were designed to do. The lesson isn't about which was better. The lesson is about having the integrity to acknowledge when someone else does something better than you. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And wisdom, like speed, has no flag." The footage fades. The two aircraft disappear into clouds. And the final title card appears, "In memory of all Allied airmen who proved that the sky has no borders and excellence has no nationality. May we honor their sacrifice by seeking truth rather than superiority and partnership rather than pride." The screen fades to black.